I told my husband I was pregnant and he panicked saying I ruined everything before moving in with his ex, but years later he begged for forgiveness. The positive sign on the plastic stick glared back at me under the harsh bathroom lights, cementing a reality that would shatter my entire world within the hour. I walked into the living room, my hands shaking uncontrollably, holding the test out to Adam. He was 34 years old, a grown man with a steady career, a mortgage with me, and a life we had supposedly built together. He didn't look up from his phone immediately. When he finally did, the color completely drained from his face, replaced by a sickly, terrifying ash gray. He didn't smile. He didn't reach out to pull me into a hug or cry tears of joy. Adam stood up so fast he knocked his knee against the heavy oak coffee table, backing away from me as if I were holding a live grenade rather than the symbol of our future. "You ruined everything," Adam said, his voice trembling with a volatile mix of absolute anger and blind panic. "I didn't want this child." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I was 32, and we had never explicitly agreed to remain childless. In fact, we had casually discussed names just a year prior. But right then, his eyes were wide, feral, and completely unrecognizable. He didn't say another word. He just turned on his heel, marched into our bedroom, and pulled his duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet. I stood paralyzed in the doorway, watching my husband of 4 years violently shove shirts, underwear, and a shaving kit into the bag. The harsh rip of the zipper sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. He pushed past me in the hallway, his shoulder checking mine hard enough to make me stumble. The front door slammed, rattling the picture frames on the walls, and then the roar of his car engine faded into the night. Just like that, I was entirely alone. For the first few days, I lived in a state of suffocating delusion. I convinced myself that he just needed space, that the reality of fatherhood had overwhelmed him, and that he would walk back through that door with a bouquet of flowers and a tearful apology. I called him dozens of times, leaving voicemails that ranged from desperate pleading to furious screaming. He blocked my number. He blocked me on all social media. It was as if I had ceased to exist the moment that second pink line appeared. A week later, my best friend called me. Her voice was uncharacteristically quiet, laced with pity that made my stomach churn. She had been at a home goods store on the other side of town and saw Adam. He wasn't alone, and he wasn't staying in some sad, cheap motel to clear his head. He was with Lucy. Lucy was his ex-girlfriend, a woman he had dated for 3 years before meeting me, and worse, she was currently his co-worker. My friend watched them laugh, holding hands as they picked out matching throw pillows and a new coffee maker. He hadn't just run away from our child, he had run straight back into a life he had been secretly preparing on the side. The realization hit me with the physical force of a freight train. He didn't just panic, he used my pregnancy as the ultimate escape hatch to openly be with the woman he had likely been seeing behind my back for months. Desperate for answers, and perhaps a shred of humanity, I drove to his parents' house. I knocked on the door, my eyes swollen from days of crying, expecting his mother to pull me inside, to offer comfort, to promise she would talk some sense into her son. Instead, Pamela opened the door just a crack. She stood there, perfectly put together, arms crossed defensively over her chest. When I begged her to tell me what was happening, her expression remained entirely cold. "Adam has made his choice, Lisa," Pamela said, her tone dripping with quiet condescension. "You can't trap a man who isn't ready. He is still too young for a family, and he needs to focus on his career and his happiness right now." I stared at her, completely utterly speechless. "He is 34 years old, Pamela," I finally choked out, the absurdity of her excuse burning my throat. "He is my husband. He is married." But she just pressed her lips into a thin line, told me to contact his lawyer, and shut the door in my face. I spent the next 8 months navigating the terrifying landscape of a high-risk pregnancy entirely alone. I packed up his remaining belongings and threw them into a dumpster. I hired a ruthless lawyer to force the sale of our house and secure my financial independence. I went to every ultrasound by myself, holding my own hand while watching the tiny heartbeat flutter on the monitor. There were nights when the loneliness was so heavy I thought it would crush my chest. I cried on the bathroom floor until I threw up, mourning the death of a marriage I thought was unbreakable. But with every passing week, as my belly grew, the tears stopped. I realized I was shedding the dead weight of a coward. When my water broke in the middle of the night, I drove myself to the hospital. I labored for 18 excruciating hours, gripping the bed rails, surrounded only by nurses and a doctor I had met twice. And then, he arrived. I named him Jeffrey. When they placed my son on my chest, with his tiny fingers wrapping instinctively around my thumb, every ounce of lingering pain evaporated. Looking down at his perfect face, I made a silent, unbreakable vow. Jeffrey would never know the feeling of not being wanted. He was my entire world, and we were going to be just fine without the man who threw us away. The divorce was finalized shortly after Jeffrey's first birthday. Adam didn't even show up to the final hearing, letting his lawyer handle the pathetic amount of child support the state mandated, a sum he fought tooth and nail to reduce. I heard through the grapevine that he and Lucy had bought a house together, playing house while I was up at 3 a.m. Rocking a teething baby, managing a full-time job and paying for daycare. But we thrived. Jeffrey grew into a bright, funny, incredibly loving toddler. I got a promotion at work. We moved into a beautiful little townhouse with a backyard where Jeffrey loved to chase the neighbor's cat. We built a beautiful, peaceful life. 4 years passed. 4 years of utter silence from the man who helped create my child. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening, just after I had put Jeffrey to bed, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting any packages, and I certainly wasn't expecting visitors. I looked through the peephole and felt my blood run instantly cold. Standing on my porch, soaked to the bone and looking at least 10 years older than the last time I saw him, was Adam. I opened the door, leaving the heavy chain engaged. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him. He looked pathetic. The arrogant, sharp-dressed man who had abandoned me was gone, replaced by someone with dark circles under his eyes, thinning hair, and a cheap, ill-fitting coat. "Lisa," Adam rasped, his voice cracking. "Please. Can I just come in out of the rain?" "No," I said, my voice steady, betraying absolutely zero emotion. "She was cheating on me. With her boss. I caught them in our house." He looked up at me, his eyes begging for the empathy I used to give him so freely. "My mom told me to come here. She said maybe you and I could try again." I made the biggest mistake of my life, Lisa. I was scared. I was stupid. But I miss you. I want to meet my child. I want to be a family. This man, who had destroyed my life, abandoned his unborn flesh and blood, and let his mother call him too young at 34 to avoid responsibility, was now 38, homeless, betrayed, and crawling back only because his backup plan had imploded. There is no us to try again. Adam's face crumpled. "Lisa, please, you can't be this cruel." "Cruel?" I interrupted, letting out a sharp, genuine laugh. "Cruelty is leaving your pregnant wife to move in with a coworker. What I am doing is protecting my family. You are nothing but a stranger standing on my porch, and if you ever show up here again, I will call the police." I didn't wait for him to respond. I shut the heavy oak door right in his face. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Adam ended up moving back into his childhood bedroom in Pamela's house, a fitting punishment for a man who was too young to act like an adult. He tried to take me to court for visitation shortly after our encounter, likely fueled by his mother's sudden interest in playing grandmother, but a judge took one look at his history of total abandonment and his outright refusal to be in Jeffrey's life for years, and denied his request, granting him nothing. Today, Jeffrey is 6 years old. He is thriving in first grade, loves dinosaurs, and has a laugh that can light up the darkest room. I recently started dating a wonderful man who treats Jeffrey like he hung the moon, and who understands exactly what it means to be a true partner. We survived the storm Adam left behind, and in the end, his cowardly exit was the greatest gift he could have ever given.